What do you think is failing in an educational assessment? Not everyone learns the same way. How are we assessing them the same way?
Knowledge today has turned into retention of information. If knowledge does not turn into action, it's just information.
Knowledge is power. I tell people that that's not true. Knowledge put to use is power.
How that information is meaningful to you, how you can use it in real life scenarios, that is probably what's missing.
It's not about memorization. It's about growing with it and learning it. It becomes a part of your thinking.
Knowledge is connecting us to the world. The world is knowledge.
We don't have all the answers, even as learners ourselves.
Don't get the impression that the process is going to be straightforward. Even if the process is zigzag, validate that, celebrate that, and enjoy the process. Flexibility is not a taboo.
That's what you're taking away. It's the learning that meant something to you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 10 of Relearning to Learn. I'm excited to be alongside our usual team, Dr. Akeen, Dr. Rob, and Dr. Hamad. Today's topic is one that students really care about. It's pretty important for them. I don't know about learners, though. It's about grading. It's about assessments, grades, rubric, evaluation. They're all the golden key terms for school, right? And it is a challenge in a way to... Their grading is not something students like. They're not a big fan of it, but they care about it. And surprisingly, everyone, instructors are not a big fan of it as well. I hope I'm speaking to everyone here.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not the biggest thing. It's not the best thing to do in an educational environment.
Taking out the trash.
Just taking out. So I'm going to be sharing a lot of stories about frustrations, anxieties, fears, a lot of that stuff. And they're usually associated with more negative emotion.
Yeah.
But honestly, all along through high school, university, I keep hearing the same set of stories. Context changes, subjects change, but it's the same story. I go to a test, I memorized everything, I worked hard, I learned it, and I'm in that test and suddenly, that's it. There's nothing popping out. And at the end of the term, that's my assessment. That's how much I learned. And it really doesn't make sense. It really is a question that's been there lingering for so long, and it kind of became gossip, right? And I'm glad we're addressing this in a way that there is a reason why things are not clicking. And what do you think, with all these sort of examples and stories, what do you think is failing in an educational assessment? Dr. Akeen, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a lovely question. I think the problem is, the challenge is that we have this assumption that everybody learns and demonstrates learning the same way. So that the sense of monolithic understanding of learning, and that in itself is a problem. So I've identified the problem, and I think the antidote, the solution, is to introduce a little bit of flexibility into the process. So diversity is important, and to going back to what I said earlier, to understand that this is about embrace. It's not about exclusion. So once you have that mindset, I think it can help you to navigate this particular challenge.
That's golden, because we're saying not everyone learns the same way. How are we assessing them the same way and basing it on their final grade on how much they learned? Dr. Rob, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that idea of like embracing. And, what bothers me in modern assessment and the assessment that I experienced as a student and going through the system was that a lot, like we talked about earlier, this idea of like fast food, there's fast assessment, right? And it's just the quick and dirty shortcut. And I can say on that snapshot of that student on that particular day, that was them. I've reduced them to that one moment. And now that sticks with them, their GPA, their maybe whole educational career. And that's not life. Life allows us retakes. Life allows us that chance to learn from an outcome and improve on it. And so to me, I think that's the issue, that we don't have this developmental model around what assessment is. It becomes high stakes, and it becomes the result, the only result that counts. And our students forget that they're learners and they default to that. I have to perform to that moment. And we shouldn't be surprised when brilliant students fall by the wayside because they don't fit the parameters of the system that's been imposed on them.
So much clarity. It's such a system-based approach, no performance whatsoever. And it really is a fast food reaction. And that's what you get, right? Dr. Muhammad, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think is failing, if any, in, assessments?
I would lean towards, with caution, saying that knowledge today has turned into retention of information. And our teaching methodologies, our course content, our syllabus, they ensure that we try to retain information. That's just one part of it. You retain information for a certain purpose. How that information is meaningful to you, how you can use it in real life scenarios, that is probably what's missing. And that's what, because that does not form part of the assessment. Now, if that is formed part of the assessment, memorization or retaining information is a big boost, because you don't need ChatGPT, you don't need AI, you don't need Google. The information is there with you, it's part of you. So, and I want to quote something in Arabic language. Knowledge is called al-ilm, ayn lam mim. And it's the same root word that you use to voice action, which is amal, ayn mim lam. So if knowledge does not turn into action, it's just information.
Wow.
It's not relatable. And that's the problem with assessment as well.
Yeah.
So relating to that, you see, there's a dictum. People say this all the time: knowledge is power. And I tell people that that's not true. Knowledge put to use is power.
Yes.
So to connect to what you just said, Dr.
Thank you very
Muhammad.
much.
It's not about retaining information. It's not about memorization. It's about growing with it and learning it. It becomes a part of your thinking, part of your identity in a way. And it's being able to be contextualized. And it kind of prompts me to ask, how? How do we do that? How can we have assessments become more learnerized? Dr. Rob, I see you nodding.
Yeah, no, I just love that example of ilm being knowledge, and then amal being work, and that they're related. They're kind of like, and I thought about the other root of ilm, or another word, which is al-alam, the world. And so knowledge is connecting us to the world. The world is knowledge. So how does that work in terms of learnerizing? So for me, it is creating a world of assessment with my learners. What do? I get into a class. I'm like, what are we trying to learn here? Okay. And we have our syllabus, our scriptures. How do we apply them? Okay. So how can you show me that you've learned something? Well, we can do these things. And we co-create, we brainstorm rubrics. We design tasks, and we design ways to evaluate those tasks together. And it's really what you said about making it meaningful. So for me, what I found is that to make learning more meaningful, to turn the ilm, knowledge, into the alam, the world, what I do is I bring my students in and we co-create rubrics that make sense to them. I ask them, what are you trying to get out of this? What knowledge, what skills, what attitudes? And we make that together. We brainstorm it, we're in agreement, and then we apply it. And I feel that that is one practical way to make assessment work for the learner, not just fast food.
That's beautiful. I mean, we have linguistic brainiacs on set here. Thank you. Like, that was such a full round moment. And really co-creating, right? We're saying co-creating even in rubrics. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about ways to strategize assessments?
Yes. So that's actually related to what I have in mind, that I give my students the opportunity to create portfolios throughout the semester. And I give, for instance, in a class on liberation theologies in the US. So the rubric may be marginalization. Think about marginalization in the past and in the present. And then eventually they can present on this. So marginalization in different societies. And so look at that as a problem, and how can we overcome this? So this provides the opportunity for students to think, to reflect, and also to be contextual, you see. So, and I find that very powerful.
Brilliant.
I think introducing the redo culture in the rubric helps a lot. And I learned this from a professor of Jewish studies when we were co-teaching a course, and we gave out assignments. And once the students submitted the assignment, so it was decided that I would mark it, and then the other professor would evaluate it. I gave my final marks and I handed over to him, and he said, well, this is not the way to do it. You need to consider this as a first or second draft and then give it back to the student. Tell him or her what their shortcomings are, and then accept it from them and give them some time, 2 or 3 weeks, to redo that draft and then submit it again. This was a great learnerizing experience for me.
So even rubrics get reworked, just like any other sort of content.
Absolutely.
They are reworked, and they take into consideration all the different parties. It kind of reminds me of a scenario that I had. Art history was one of my least favorite subjects, history in general, in high school. Moved on to university, and I had a brilliant professor. She, in her classes, super reflective, super analytical, very, very conversation-based. And so when we came to assessments, her assessment method weren't multiple choice questions, wasn't about retaining information. It was more about reflecting. So it was just 2 questions that you didn't need to give memorization tips in it. You just had to be able to reflect. And mind you, I loved it. I couldn't have loved or looked at art history in any other way. And I really left that class feeling like I spoke her language. I felt like I was starting to speak like her. I was starting to see through the same lens. And the amount of empowerment that it gave me. Now, looking at the flip side, not everyone had the same experience. It wasn't everyone's cup of tea. And so you get those sort of, pushback. Different people have different voices. We're saying co-create, we're saying be part of the rubric. But to what extent, right? To what extent can we keep saying, have a voice here? And is there any boundary that we want to do to that? Should there be any, if any? I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts about this, Dr. Hamad.
I don't think so. We have discussed this several times, and although it's a repetitive theme, I don't mind bringing it up again. This is a journey. It's a journey. It has its ups and downs, and it has personal, individual proclivities and sensibilities involved. And we're all different. So we will approach it differently. We will approach it at our own pace. If we are ready to make that change, despite the ability and despite the awareness and the knowledge to bring about that change, it's going to happen slowly. So that needs to be taken into consideration.
So what do we say? I just want to kind of dig deeper into it. We say we have a scenario where the student likes it and the student doesn't. What happens with all those voices? What happens to the rubric? Are we listening? Are we accepting? Are we giving our own opinion and kind of working with that? And I mean, a lot of instructors and students are like, they're listening to this podcast and they're like, okay, then kind of give us an answer, which is what we're saying. We don't have all the answers, even as learners ourselves. But I kind of want to put that little burden on you as well and ask you, like, what do they do? Who do they listen to? And with so many voices, and we're saying co-create, where's the line? Is there a line? Or how do you feel about that?
So that's a brilliant question. What we need to remember is,
I want to
go back.
Please, I'm putting that all on you and not just stop.
I want to go back to a theme that we have mentioned before as well,
Yeah.
which is the connection between structure and fluidity or flexibility.
Okay.
The other idea is the sense of mutuality. So you are not the only teacher in the class, for God's sake. learnerization process, you are letting go of that sage on the stage that Akin talked about in the last episode, and you are allowing the students to participate in that process. So let your weaknesses be known and let the strength of others, utilize the strength of others to address your weaknesses and utilize your strengths to address the weakness of the students. The students can do that mutually amongst themselves, and they can do that with the faculty as well.
Equal grounds.
Absolutely.
Equal grounds.
And that takes me to that. This going back to this element of process. You see, so when we think about process, don't get into this. Don't get the impression that the process is going to be straightforward, or the process is going to be is going to be simplistic. So the process can actually be very complicated. You see, but the fun aspect of this is that you're really engaged in the process, and you're fully engaged in the process, and even if the process is zigzag, you see, you don't let go, you see, and you understand that you're actually engaging in experiential learning, you see. So if this is about experiential learning, so ab initio, from the beginning, you know that people come into that classroom with different experiences. So validate that and celebrate that and enjoy the process. That's my thinking about this.
I mean, how do you navigate all, that sort of process for challenges that may arise with co-creating for rubric?
I've got a huge smile on my face because what I'm hearing is so refreshing and so empowering and goes to the core of why I became a teacher in the first place. Because the teachers that I had growing up were role models that taught me to think and care and grow. And I think that's this journey you've talked about. And how does this relate to assessment? And I just love what you were saying about all of these differences. So the challenge is creating the mutuality. You said that. I thought that was beautiful. And not being married to an outcome, but allowing this process to emerge recursively. But in practical terms, let's be practical.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a quiz the other day. I had my students develop the questions. Then I turned around and I said, okay, now let's think about how we could evaluate the answers. What is important to you? And some of them said creativity. Fantastic. That's one criteria. Some said, I want it to be factual. Perfect. Another criterion. Another one said, I want it to be real or authentic, that it expresses what I think or believe. Perfect. And we generated a list. And I said, okay, why don't you choose the rubrics that make sense to you and grade yourself? Whoa. Right? They really felt empowered because they're not only learning about content and they're not only expressing their views on something, but they were also validating what's important to them. Right? So rubrics were variegated according to the needs of an individual. And that was an equitable way to harness that diversity. And they loved it.
Value-based rubrics. Not about a system that you get. Tick box, checklist. Here's what we have to get by the end of this course. It comes from them, through them, by them, but also with the guidance and the trust that kind of gets generated within that environment. Kind of brings me to our we're speaking a lot about morals and codes and ways to navigate it. It brings me back to our final question. Takeaways, just our usual reflections of things that instructors, but also students can do to be able to learnerize rubrics.
Flexibility is not aram. That's the way. So just keep that in mind, because usually professors, think that, if I'm flexible, people think that, I'm just giving up on my standards. But flexibility is not a taboo. So just keep that in mind.
I think the ability to rebuild, revision, reflection, and review in all forms of assessments that we do, I think that would be really important, more for the students than for the faculty or teacher.
Oh, powerful things. For me, I think it's about this dichotomy between what they now call formative assessment and summative assessment, and this bouncing back and forth. It's trying to remove that high stakes thing in the summative assessment. And I feel like it's all formative. So my suggestion is every test that happens, every assignment, whether it's a project or something that gets evaluated and is a co-evaluation with the learner as part of the evaluation process, and not silencing or removing the instructor. And I'm just going to give myself A's because the instructor doesn't care. No, that there's intentionality for me as an instructor as well. However, that this idea of revision and retake, that we can revisit these things as we move through the school year or through the semester, and that as we get closer to the end, reflection, and that the reflection be a bigger part of how they get their final grade, because that in the end, as Muhammad had said, that's what you're taking away. It's the learning that meant something to you, not the facts that you're going to forget tomorrow.
That's what matters. That's what matters at the end of the day. And I think I'd like to thank all of you because you really gave such generous answers, and answers that, they make the heart of any learner happy. And I think, giving that space, that reworking, that flexibility, setting aside, a little bit of the ego and the high up, giving same common grounds. I think that's what we're really trying to say about learnerizing here. I think that's what really matters. And again, thank you so much for such generous answers, and looking forward to more episodes.
Thank you.
Thank you very so much.